It was a quiet afternoon at the local park, the kind of day where you'd expect nothing but peace. But then, a group of rowdy young men showed up, their laughter echoing as they scanned the area for trouble. Their eyes landed on an elderly black man sitting calmly on a bench, his weathered face gazing into the distance. To them, he seemed like an easy target, vulnerable and alone. What they didn't know was that this man was no ordinary senior. He had faced battles far tougher than anything they could imagine. As the thugs approached, their taunts grew louder, their arrogance blinding them to the truth. They didn't see the strength hidden behind his calm demeanor, or the years of discipline etched into his very being. But when the situation took a turn, they learned a lesson they'd never forget. What happened next left everyone speechless. The young men closed in, their voices dripping with mockery as they surrounded the old man. "What's the matter, old-timer? Lost your way?" One of them sneered, leaning in closer. The man stayed calm, his expression unchanged, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that hinted at something deeper. He didn't respond, didn't flinch, just sat there quietly, observing them. To anyone watching, it seemed like an unfair match, a group of strong, reckless youth against one defenseless elder. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath his worn jacket, this man carried stories of survival, courage, and resilience that none of them could comprehend. As the situation grew more tense, passers-by glanced nervously, unsure whether to intervene. The old man slowly adjusted his posture, sitting up straighter. There was a sense of purpose in his movements, almost as if he had been here before, facing danger, calculating his next move. The leader of the group, a tall, cocky guy with a smirk plastered across his face, stepped forward. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" He jeered, his friends laughing behind him. Still, the elderly man didn't react, his silence unsettling in a way the thugs hadn't anticipated. "Hey, we're talking to you," another one shouted, growing impatient. He kicked at the man's cane, sending it tumbling to the ground. A quiet gasp came from a woman walking by, but no one dared to intervene. The man sighed, leaning down to retrieve his cane. His hands, though aged, moved with surprising steadiness. "You boys sure like to test your luck," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. The words were simple, but something about the way he spoke made them hesitate for a moment. The leader scoffed, brushing it off. "Luck? What, you gonna teach us a lesson?" he said mockingly. But as the man slowly stood, something in his eyes changed, a glimpse of a past full of battles, discipline, and strength. He wasn't angry. No, his look was one of quiet certainty, like a soldier who'd faced far worse than what stood before him now. The group exchanged uneasy glances, but their pride wouldn't let them back down. "You don't scare us, old man," the leader growled, stepping closer. What none of them realized was that they were about to uncover a side of this man they never could have imagined. The elderly man stood tall, his cane now firmly in hand, and for the first time, he looked each of them in the eye. His gaze was steady, piercing, as if he could see straight through their bravado. "You think strength is about numbers," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the group. "But it's not. It's about knowing when to stand your ground." The leader chuckled nervously, trying to mask his unease. "Big talk for someone your age," he said, motioning for his friends to move closer. But they hesitated, something about the old man's composure unsettling them. The tension thickened as the man slowly removed his jacket, revealing a worn patch on his sleeve, a military insignia. "Vietnam," he said, almost as if to himself. The word hung in the air, and for a moment, the thugs looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. "You fought in a war," one of them finally blurted out, the cockiness in his voice faltering. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned on his cane and took a deliberate step forward. "Boys," he said, his tone calm but firm, "I've seen things that would make your worst nightmares feel like a bedtime story. If you want to keep pushing, I'll show you exactly what I mean." The park seemed to hold its breath as the group stood frozen, caught between their arrogance and the unshakable presence of a man who had faced true danger. One wrong move, and everything was about to change. The leader clenched his fists, trying to shake off the unease creeping in. "You're just trying to scare us," he spat, but his voice lacked the confidence it had moments ago. The group started murmuring, their earlier bravado slipping as they watched the man's steady, unshaken demeanor. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, a new voice interrupted. "Hey, what's going on here?" A woman's sharp tone cut through the air, and the crowd parted slightly to reveal a middle-aged woman approaching. She was carrying a bag of groceries and had a no-nonsense expression. "You boys think it's fun ganging up on someone old enough to be your grandfather?" One of the younger thugs muttered under his breath, but before he could finish, the woman added, "You might want to rethink this. That's Mr. Jenkins." The name sent a ripple through the group. Jenkins. Wait, the Vietnam vet who saved that kid last year. One of them stammered, his tone shifting from cocky to concerned. The old man, Mr. Jenkins, stayed silent, his eyes never leaving the leader. The woman continued, "You don't want to know what he's capable of. Trust me." The leader laughed nervously, trying to mask his growing discomfort. "We're not scared," he said, though his wavering voice betrayed him. But as Mr. Jenkins took another step forward, the group began to sense there was more to this man's story, something far beyond anything they bargained for, and with every second, it became harder to deny that they had underestimated him in the worst way. The leader hesitated, his bravado fading as the tension in the air became impossible to ignore. "All right, old man," he said, forcing a smirk, "we'll leave, but only because this isn't worth our time." He motioned for his friends to back off, and they began to shuffle away, clearly shaken. But just as they turned to leave, Mr. Jenkins called out, "Hold on." His voice was calm, yet it stopped them in their tracks. Slowly, he walked toward the leader, standing inches away. "You think walking away erases what you've done," he said quietly. "You came here to intimidate someone you thought was weak. That says more about you than anything else." The leader's eyes darted nervously, unsure how to respond. But before he could speak, Mr. Jenkins held out his hand, not in anger, but with something clenched in his palm. He opened it to reveal a small, worn medal. "This," Mr. Jenkins said, his voice steady, "was given to me for saving lives in a place far worse than this park. I don't need to fight you to prove anything, but maybe you should think about what kind of man you want to be." The group stared in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Finally, the leader muttered, I'm sorry," before turning and walking away with his friends trailing behind. As the park returned to quiet, Mr. Jenkins bent down, picked up his cane, and nodded to the woman who had stepped in. "Sometimes," he said with a faint smile, "it's not about the fight, it's about making them think." The twist lingered in the air. A man who could have used force chose wisdom instead, leaving an impact no punch ever could. As the group disappeared into the distance, the park felt peaceful again. The woman with the groceries approached Mr. Jenkins, shaking her head in amazement. "You've got a way of handling things," she said with a small laugh. Mr. Jenkins chuckled softly. "Sometimes, people just need to be reminded there's more to strength than fists." He slipped the medal back into his pocket, its meaning far greater than any words he could have spoken. The woman smiled. "Well, you definitely reminded them, and probably taught everyone watching a thing or two." She glanced at the onlookers, who were now quietly dispersing, their faces filled with respect and reflection. Mr. Jenkins nodded, tapping his cane lightly against the ground. "Life's full of lessons. Sometimes you teach them without even trying."